know, this guy was in here the other day talking to me. And he said, hey, there's something screwy in the world. The people without guns are winning.
Anything that's I mess up, you fix, right?
Absolutely.
Or I fix it.
You fix it, yeah.
My name is Gene Sharp, and this is the work I do.
What do you do? How would you describe your work?
That's always a problem, describing my work, because it doesn't fit a lot of the people's preconceptions. Primarily, I try to understand the nature and potential of nonviolent forms of struggle to undermine dictatorships.
This is a technique of combat. It is a substitute for war and other violence.
We don't know quite how it spread, but it certainly did into 30-some languages in different parts of the world, on all continents except Antarctica. The famous 198 methods. This seems to have been an extraordinary response. That's simply the 198 specific methods, the specific forms of strike or economic boycott or civil disobedience or protest. Exactly the counterpart of military, different kinds of military guns or bombs in a military struggle. Unless they have something instead of violence and war, they will go back for violence and war every time. I didn't start out to do this. I had a religious background that led me to want to leave the world in a bit of a better place and better condition than when I came here. And how to do that was always a problem. I was maybe 25 or something like that. I took a civil disobedience position against military conscriptions. And so I went to prison. I had a 2-year sentence. I did 9 months and 10 days. In those days, you counted the days as well as more. But I don't think that my action there did any good whatsoever. But it was just to keep my sense of my own integrity so I would carry on in work that I thought was really important. If you can identify the sources of a government's power, such as legitimacy, such as popular support, such as their institutional support, and then you know on what that dictatorship depends for its existence. And since all those sources of power are dependent upon the goodwill, cooperation, obedience, and help of people and institutions, then your job becomes fairly simple. All you have to do is shrink that support and that legitimacy, that cooperation, that obedience, and the regime will be weakened. And if you can take those sources of power away, the regime will fall. And that was a sort of eureka moment, that this was not just a theory, and this was something that actually had been applied in many different historical cases. And that was very, very important.
And how did you feel at that point?
At the point, that eureka point?
Yeah.
Oh, greatly relieved. Greatly relieved, because that's what made it all reality. The U.S. Department of Defense and other countries sometimes sent special people to Harvard University for a year of doing something different. I had a program within the Center for National Affairs on nonviolent sanctions, on nonviolent forms of struggle.
I first met Gene Sharp at Harvard University. I was an Army senior fellow up there for a year. And one day I saw a notice on the bulletin board about Program for Nonviolent Sanctions at 2 o'clock this afternoon. So I had nothing to do, so I went to see who these peaceniks were and to confirm my preconceived notion that they probably had rings in their noses and ears and dirty. And so I went up there just to see them. And surprisingly, they weren't there. I saw, regular looking people there. And a few minutes after we all sat down, this little short, soft-spoken gentleman comes to the front of the room and says, "My name is Gene Sharp, and we're here today to discuss how to seize political power and deny it to others."
I say nonviolent struggle is armed struggle. And we have to take back that term from those advocates of violence who try to justify with pretty words that kind of combat. Only with this type of struggle, one fights with psychological weapons, social weapons, economic weapons, and political weapons. And that this is ultimately more powerful against oppression, injustice, and tyranny than is violence.
That got my attention. I think Vietnam influenced my view about the importance of nonviolent struggle, and particularly the importance of getting Gene Sharp's ideas out to the rest of the world, because we must have an alternative. Vietnam convinced me that we need to have an alternative to killing people.
The military dictators of Burma were denouncing my little publication, From Dictatorship to Democracy, because it was giving some ideas about how their suppressed Burmese and other nationalities living in Burma could free themselves. That's why when someone simply carrying that little booklet with them and smuggling it through, when they were caught, they were arrested and sent to prison for 7 years for carrying a few sheets of paper, rather than bombs or guns or anything like that. Dictatorship cannot stand this. I had gone to Beijing after the Tiananmen Square protests were well underway. That whole event, which it should be remembered, was not just in Beijing, but reportedly in 350 other cities of China. Similar protests were going on, but they were not planned. They were not prepared. There was no strategic decision. There was no advanced decision how long you stay in the square and when you leave. What became very clear to me in retrospect was that the students in the square were operating with great commitment and bravery, but they really didn't know what the hell they were doing. The students had no plan. They were improvising all the way through. And later on we know that many of those Chinese people who were out in the streets to block there in another day were shot and killed. The attitude that you simply improvise and that the improvisation will bring you greater success is nonsense. It's actually the opposite. That if you don't know what you're doing, you're likely to get into big trouble. I'd never grown orchids before. I had driven down to Manhattan to see some friends of mine I had known when they were at Harvard. And near their house there was a flower shop. And they had some quite large potted plants of cattleya orchids. So I bought 2 or 3 of those. They survived for a while, they bloomed for a while, but of course they soon died, but that led me to inquire about other ones and learning more about how you really take care of them and how difficult some of them can be and how easy some of them are. They take quite a bit of work. That became very important because it was something I could treat as they needed to be treated and not expecting miracles, but if you don't treat orchids right or anything else in life, then it's not going to thrive.
I went to Budapest at the request of the International Republican Institute, which was providing support to the Serbian opposition movement. And one particular part of that opposition movement was Otpor. That's a Serbian word for resistance.
He's a retired colonel and he has this type of the military approach, and you know the way he speaks, it's really something that, you know, creates a strange impression with a bunch of students, leaders.
We talked for a while and I said, well, something's missing here. We haven't talked about who's the leader of this organization. Who is the leader? And then one guy says, we don't have a leader. And I said, well, wait a minute, guys. I did not fall off the turnip truck coming over here. Somebody has to lead an organization that has mobilized the entire Serbian society. There has to be a leader to that organization. There has to be a leader who's coordinating all these demonstrations. There has to be a leadership that's getting millions of dollars in funding. And they started sort of laughing.
So we spent probably 1 hour fooling him about some stuff. And the reason for this was that we were not very comfortable about giving the details about the organization to the foreigner.
And then they explained to me, you know, why there's no, quote, leader. It's because to keep it away from the government. The government doesn't know who's in charge. And I later found out I was talking to the leader, Sergei Popovich.
When Bob Halvey gave us the Gene Sharp's The Politics of Nonviolent Action, we were quite amazed. Partly I was ashamed that I didn't know about such a book before, even if there was a translation of From Dictatorship to Democracy in Serbian, but I've never seen it. And seeing the knowledge of how power operates and how pillars of the support operates, and all of this stuff we needed to learn hard way throughout our experience, written systematically in one place was quite an amazing thing. And from that moment I knew I will read it, even it was quite a fat book, but I didn't know how much it can influence the way we think, and also I didn't know how useful it will be in developing our own future trainings. It's obviously that we are the majority. If we can just recognize all of those who are against Milosevic by, saluting each other with a fist, he would probably be over within a few years.
Već 10 godina pokušavam da skinem ovu fleku. Verujte mi, sve sam probala. Sada se pojavila nova mašina. Ona ima odličan program koji pouzdano, sigurno i nepovratno skida ovu i slične mrlje.
Dozvolite mi...
Samo tu. Vidite, deluje.
Konačno. Gotov je.
Atomization is when the regime attempts to make every individual in the society an isolated unit. It's one of the main ways that totalitarian systems seek to control their populations, make them all fear of each other, fearing to speak out and to act together, never telling a neighbor or even sometimes a family member what you really think.
And that's why it's so important that you begin with these very, very low-risk activities so that people can put their foot forward for the first time, put their toe in the water of revolutionary change. That's the foundation that we work on, is changing the obedience patterns, moving the obedience to a willing obedience rather than a coerced obedience.
By seeing the example of the demonstration of bravery by other people. Now it's we. And we can do something that I alone could not do.
During the 96-97, we were walking day after day after day, and the police was blocking streets, and our numbers were start falling because it was obviously too boring for the people to demonstrate every day in a harsh winter. So we said, okay, why won't we go home and try to make noise from our balconies? So we start hitting pots and pans, and this spread like fire throughout the Belgrade and other cities, and radio stations were, transmitted, oh, it is very loud in this neighborhood, oh, these people are using the loudspeakers, oh, there is a disco club joining the protest. And we were doing it from 7:30 to 8 p.m. as a response to the state TV news. That was the answer. This is what we don't watch your crap. We do our own thing. From the pots and pans to doing the stickers, so the stickers can be done in every building. And also the things like, will you go and prosecute the kids for wearing Otpar t-shirts when there is not one single law which bans wearing anything on a t-shirt? So, for the policemen, getting inside the high schools and arresting high school kids only because they were wearing the t-shirt, and then going home and talking to their wife, whose friend was complaining because her son was arrested, having a dialogue with your kid who is coming now from his school where nobody wants to spend time with him or her because their father is, beating kids from my neighborhood. And now, this systemic oppression doesn't work.
These pillars are holding up the government, like my fingers are holding up this book. And I develop a strategy to undermine each of those pillars: the police, the Sangha, or the religious institutions, the workers, whatever. Every organization. And as they weaken and start to collapse, the government will collapse when those pillars are broken. Ideally, we want those pillars not destroyed, but transferred over to the democratic movement.
If you want these pillars to shift sides, you need to co-opt people. You can co-opt people by two means. If you put a price on what they are doing for the sake of the regime, or give them the clear message that there will be a place for them in the future society. This is exactly what Otpor was done. We were telling the police that we are both victims of the same system. They are pushed to do things they wouldn't like to do. We are pushed to the streets instead of sitting in the classrooms. There is no reason to have war between victims and victims. One victims wear blue uniforms, other victims wear blue jeans, but there is no reason for this conflict. And this worked, really worked. And it worked in Georgia, it worked in Ukraine, it worked in many other places in the world. This is the way you do. You go and co-opt from discursive pillars. You don't throw stones to the police.
There are many people in conflict situations that really would like to use violence, but their opponents really have more military weapons and weapons of violence, which are usually physical weapons, than the potential resistors have. So if the resistors choose to fight with violence, their opponent has all the advantages in that situation because you're choosing to fight with your opponent's best weapons. But you can choose to fight with a totally different kind of weapon than these nonviolent forms, which are much more difficult for the opponent to counteract.
It's very difficult to build a nonviolent march because what you need is only one agent provocateur or only one lunatic or drunk person throwing stone at the police. So my question is, you have 20,000 peaceful demonstrators, you have one idiot breaking out the window, and these people got all of the media attention. So this is the message which can efficiently undermine your movement. Big concentration tactics are very difficult to control. So what we were dealing with is like you go on the march and there is a risk of the people getting arrested. So what would you normally do? Instead of putting the big guys in front, you will put the girls in front. You will put the grandmas in front. You will put the military veterans in front. So the police is now faced with the friendly faces. And these people are actually carrying the flowers and the banners and smiling. So you make the situation less threatening, so you make the possibility of violent outcome really smaller. October the 5th should be seen in a context of a successful strategy, and that was not the day like many spectators of media like CNN. They just see this big bunch of people, revolution, boom, and it's over. It was first of all 10 years of attempts and failures, and 2 years of existence of Otpor, 5 different campaigns, and we were setting the victory on the elections. We knew that Milosevic will lose, and we knew that he will not accept the fact that he has lost. So there was this 10 days of increasing pressure. That was very important because not only we brought all the country to the standstill, including the general strikes, efficiently dragged down the 70% of electrical power. And if you look to the gene's mechanisms, this is called a non-violent coercion. So first you try to convert somebody, then you try to accommodate somebody, and then you go to the coercion. In non-violent coercion, your opponent, in this case Milosevic, was ready to continue the struggle. In fact, orders were given to the police to react against the people. But people were not responding to these orders because the policemen will know that if they shoot into the crowd of hundreds of thousands of people, including their own kids, they will go down to the sink together with Milosevic. They didn't want that to happen. But this is why this preparation period was so important, because throughout this period, after victory in the elections and general strike, we successfully explained to the people in the police and in the military that it is not, again, government against the opposition, but this is the people as whole, Serbian people, against Milosevic. So around 3 p.m. you had like 200,000 to 300,000 people on this square, and there was a non-violent takeover of the physically of this building. And this is where the people who broke into the building at the October the 5th found many leaflets pre-marked for Milosevic. So this is where we, actually the physical cheat was taking place on the second floor of this building. It was more like symbolic takeover, because what was the real takeover was that Milosevic lost power that day, because police disobeyed, because he ordered the military to get from the barracks after 3 p.m. and they disobeyed. This is where he lost the power. What you were looking on the TV and physical overtaking of the building was just the symbol of him losing authority that day. I think what we learned from Bob and what comes and derives from Gene Sharp thinking and writing influenced the way we think, and also made our struggle more efficient in a very important point when we were preparing for a decisive struggle. And yes, I think what Bob and Gene are doing is precious around the world, and we strongly believe that the nonviolent revolutions cannot be exported or imported, but the knowledge on how to successfully implement nonviolent struggle can and is transferred from one group to another as we speak.
Well, I felt good that here was a revolution that occurred nonviolently. There was no violence on the part of the Democratic opposition. And it shows that what Gene was talking about year after year after year, there are realistic alternatives to violent conflict.
Well, I mean, after Serbia, we were working with Georgians and Ukrainians and Lebanese and Maldivians and Iranians and Zimbabweans and Colombians and Guatemalans and West Papuans and the groups from places in the world I couldn't literally find on the map.